This is a podcast of hard questions. See me cross-examined. Do I have the answers? Do I really have a plan that works? Ask your questions and decide for yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Everyone is God political podcast. I'm joined with the lovely Marcus. Introduce.
I'm Marcus White, leader of Everyone is God, Britain's most visionary political party. And today we're talking about dictatorship, aren't we, Brad?
Dictatorship. It's always made to sound like almost like a boogeyman word kind of thing. Like it's meant to sound really scary, and I see the pros and cons in it, but we've got a structure that we're going to go by, and I'm going to fire away, Marcus, straight away. I'm going to go straight at you.
Brad, come on.
Straight at you. So, your view, Marcus, is that it takes more than one person to be a dictator. So, i.e., Putin, for example, you say that it's not just Putin. It's the people as well. Otherwise,
Exactly.
The whole thing wouldn't work. It's not as hardcore as it may sound. Like, it's a dictatorship. Only one person, the leader, he's in charge and he's doing everything. What's your view on this, Marcus? I know you've got an interesting sort of point on it.
So, the narrative that we see in the media and that people generally adopt is you have a sort of, in countries where you have a dictator, the dictator is the bad person in the country. And what I want to do today is actually break that down and analyze whether that's true or not. And my view is, and it's not just my view, people who study this and the research that's done is, it really shows that actually a dictatorship is far more than one person. And we're going to break this down today. So, Brad, I want to ask you a question, right? You imagine you go into London, you go to Speaker's Corner, and you say to everybody that's around, you say, I'm ordering Britain to invade France next week. What's going to happen? Do you think the people of Britain will follow you?
Possibly not. There might be one or two. There's always one or two people that will come along for the ride, but you never know. I won't have much of a posse, I would say, or much of a following.
And it would probably be exactly the same, if on one of your podcasts, if you said, right, come on, everybody, I want to invade France next week, and I'm ordering you all to invade France. The same thing would happen, would it not?
Yeah. Well, it depends. Am I the dictator at that specific time, or am I myself?
No, you're you. Just right.
Okay.
You are now. Next week, you go to London. You say, right, come on, Britain. Next week, we're invading France. What's going to happen? Not a lot.
Not a lot, I don't think so, no.
Okay, I agree, and I think the same thing would happen if I said, let's invade France. And also, imagine pre-invasion of Ukraine.
Yep.
Before, when Putin could, in theory, come over to this country without being arrested. Yep. Imagine he went into London and he said, right, Britain, I'm ordering you to invade France. I mean, what do you think would happen? Do you think Britain's going to invade France?
Possibly not. But I think he could probably muster up a few more people than I could, or possibly even you could, Marcus.
Maybe so, but I think most people would just laugh and just say he's being ridiculous. Yep. Now, you see, this is the whole point, okay? This is the key point. You cannot give yourself political and military power. It's impossible. An individual cannot give themselves power. It's only people who follow them that give them power. So a dictator as one person without any followers has zero power, zero influence, and cannot dictate anything at all. And straight away you start to see that this whole notion of there being a single dictator in a country is completely false.
What about people that say that, Putin, where we talk about dictators, it's often Putin or Xi Jinping. Most people say, he doesn't necessarily have to have the support of the people, because if they don't follow his orders, people go missing quite frequently in Russia. Like anyone that overthrows, anyone that tries to, step in the way of the way things are meant to be done, they could end up going missing.
So this perfectly leads into to an answer to this question. And what I wanted to do will answer your question entirely. So to answer this question, Brad, we've got to do this process properly, and then we get the full answer to your question. So here we go, right? I'm basing this on Russia because obviously Russia at this moment in history has a very obvious dictator, around the world. It's a superpower and they've got a clear dictator in power. So here we go. Russia, there's 143 million people in Russia, and about 73 million of those are sort of the workforce of working age. Right, now, so Putin, the first tool he needs to be on his side to have any power at all really is the military. And there's about 1.6 million people in Russian military. These are estimates that I've got from online. It depends, if it's different people say different amounts, but these are estimates. And the supporting industries to the military, that's people who manufacture the weapons, the logistics, moving the military equipment around, all that sort of stuff. That's about 4.5 million people. So that's a total of 6 million people who are frontline military or supporting the military. They all choose to follow Putin's orders. It's just that simple. Putin does not, I doubt it whether he's fired himself a single rocket or shell or drone into Ukraine. He's not pressed a single button that's done that. It's his military machine. And that's 6 million people in Russia that are following him and actually actively invading Ukraine. So that represents about 8% of the working population of Russia. That's 73 million people. So straight away, you see that this machine, this dictatorship now has spread to 6 million people. They're involved directly in the dictatorship process. Now, as you said, okay, in your question, what about if somebody stands up and criticizes Putin? They get arrested and put in jail. Well, how many people are involved in that process? Well, this is the police and the National Guard. Now, in Russia, that's about 1 million people. So he has 1 million people who are happy to arrest and lock up their neighbors, maybe their family even, people in their town, their city. So he's got 1 million people who will suppress people standing up to him. 1 million Russians. So if you add that up now, that's 6 million plus 1 million, that's 7 million people. That's 10% of the working population of Russia who are directly acting as Putin's instrument of power and oppression. So it's not just Putin, that's 7 million people. So that's the first stage. Now, the second stage is that if you then take the civil service and all these state-owned industries of Russia, so obviously the civil service and these industries are controlled by Putin and the Kremlin. So they're all directly following his direction and supporting him. Now that's about 24 million people. And then you can add the media to it, which is all state-owned. Well, sorry, most of it's state-owned or state-run. And that's about another 180,000 people. So all in all, you're getting a total of about 24 million people in Russia who are working for Putin and the Kremlin. Do you see the scale of this? That is 32% of the working population. So straight away, that is his machine that funds and runs and funds the war machine. It's the machine that goes and arrests anybody who stands up to him. It's not him doing these 24 million jobs. It's 24 million Russians, a third of the working population. So this is the reality of dictatorship. It takes a massive amount of people to completely support that. And then the thing is this, right? All these 24 million people have family, friends, associates, and such like that are talking with them, who know what they do. They know whether they work in the police or the military or whatever. And, you know, what are they saying to these people? Are they supporting them? Are they turning a blind eye to it? Now, I know this is easy to say from here, you know, about standing up to Putin. And we're going to look at the process of toppling dictators.
Yeah.
This is the reality of dictatorship.
Are there any pros to having a sort of dictatorship rather than, you know, having the so-called democracy that we have in this country? Let's just say we have a prime minister, we have elections every 4 years. You know, some people might say, like Putin, he's not bothered about what America does, what England does, because he knows he's going to be in power for probably, you know, probably next 20 years he'll be the leader. So it's like I said at the start, it's always made to sound really bad, dictator. Some people like that. They think it echoes sort of strength, like, you know, stability as well, and ultimately no BS that you see what's happening in our country's politicians taking money from left, right, and center. And, you know, if this happened in Russia, like, you know, Putin's obviously deeply involved in every deal that happens. And if it doesn't go the right way, there are like the common sort of conclusion is that people just tend to go missing. They don't even get arrested. They literally go missing and they're never seen again. So I struggle with it.
Right. So I think it's a really good question. So when you look at dictators around the world, there's a whole spectrum of them, and there's very violent dictators, and then there's much more benevolent dictators. I think your question is sort of in a sense very poignant, because I think there are huge potential advantages to dictatorship. So one of the things is you get consistent leadership, and it's not changing, say, every 4 or 5 years, and you're having completely different agendas, which mean you can't have a consistent direction and political system for a country. So dictatorship does offer stability if it's benevolent. It offers huge stability. It also gets the job done, because when you have a dictator and they say, we're doing this, that gets done. And if you go to countries like China, they get stuff done 100%. Much quicker and much more efficiently than we do. The other thing is dictators are more authoritative by definition. And therefore, in a sort of more benevolent dictatorship, you can have much lower crime rates because it's much tougher and people don't step out of line.
Yeah.
So you have that advantage as well. And people, you know, I've talked to Chinese people about this. You know, that's a sort of, I don't know, you could call it a soft dictatorship. I don't know how you want to frame it. But the bulk of the Chinese people feel very safe in China because they have such clear boundaries. It's a very safe country. It's very well run on the whole, although, of course, there are some human rights issues. And they're making massive progress there. And there's many very exemplary projects they do out there. They're greening up their desert, for example. You know, they do amazing projects out there. So I think there's a whole set of advantages of dictatorship, but it's got to be completely benevolent and fully enlightened. Yeah. My political preference is to have, I call it democratic dictatorship. I believe people should have choice about their leader, but when a leader's in power, they should have really greater power to be able to put their agenda out there, because that's what they were voted in for. And you need to test, does their agenda work? And they need to have power to do that. If you dilute power, you just get this grey politics, really, that we sort of have now.
We literally have it now. Nothing happens. It just seems pathetic. Yeah. And also as well, the dictatorship as well, with stability, what that rules out is the whole money, the lobbyists and all that sort of stuff. You know, politicians having to take money to get put in power so they can fund their
Yes,
campaigns
exactly. This
and
is
all
it.
these kinds of things. With a
Yeah,
dictator, he knows he's in charge. So anyone that wants to make a deal with that country, especially a superpower, you
yeah,
know, they have to play ball. Basically, they have to do what the guy says. You can't. He's not going to sell his whole country out because, you know, he's got the final swing of that sword. I suppose the
exactly.
only the only negative issue is if you get a really bad dictator in, and then it comes to the second part of this is how do we overthrow that dictator?
Okay, well, look, so this is a really good question, and there's some wonderful research out there on this question that's been done. So there are some political scientists called Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephen, and they did a very landmark study, a beautiful study, where they analysed 323 violent and non-violent campaigns against dictators within countries between 1900 and 2006. And here's some of the headline results from that research. So the first thing is, I really love this one. Non-violent campaigns were twice as likely to succeed in overthrowing a dictator as armed campaigns, violent campaigns. The success rates for non-violent campaigns were 53%, whereas it's 26% for violent uprisings. So civil war is not the effective way, to descend into civil war is not the effective way of overthrowing dictators. And this is historically proven. And then the other headline result, which is another really interesting one, they found that when the percentage of the population who actively and sustained had sort of active and sustained protests, when it hit 3.5% of the overall population of the country, that is when that was the critical point at which these campaigns would become successful, and there was enough people to drive that agenda through. And they found that a cross-section of society, when all of society, rather than a sort of militarily active youth, rather than that, if you had children, middle-aged and elderly en masse protesting at 3.5% of the population or more, that was the most effective package for overthrowing a dictator. Now, there's another piece of research done by a chap called Gene Sharp, who wrote a famous book called Dictatorship to Democracy. And he found what I was driving at earlier on, that when you pull down the structure of dictatorship, it falls. And by that I mean the military and the police, the civil service and bureaucracy, the media and the business elite who are, in the pockets of the dictator. When people en masse start striking or not cooperating in those services, and as we've seen in Russia, you're talking about 24 million people. If they start saying, we're going to strike, we're not supporting your agenda, we're not going to do our jobs properly until we get what we want, it starves the dictatorship of money, it slows down the whole political economic system, and it just dismantles the dictatorship. And this book sort of details that process and has been used as a guide for people who've actually, countries who've successfully toppled dictators recently. Mm-hmm. So I think, we don't have to be violent to topple dictators. You have to be determined and have more than 3.5% of the population. And the people who directly support the dictator, they just withdraw that support. And the dictator, their lifeblood is starved and they fall.
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting dynamic that opened up there when you said that, and I think it would be totally opposite, because if you have a dictator, you are in control, you are making the final decisions. So all you have to do really is to do what the people want. As long as you keep the people happy, that's fundamental to everything else. If we're in this country, the politicians have to keep the people happy, but they also have to worry about big corporations and their interests and all the rest of it. So it's I can see where the dictatorship has some benefits in that sense. Like I said before, though, it's just literally about being lucky and getting the right guy in there that's going to do the right by the people. Like, I mean, what we're seeing going on right now around the world is we're seeing politicians just like Nigel Farage, for instance, just openly taking £5 million. Like, this is criminal. This is criminal. A
Well,
man that wants to be prime minister is going to take £5 million, and people are just like, "Yep, this is the guy. He's a man of the people."
you know what, Brad? It's interesting because we haven't spoken about this, but and I think maybe this is another show, but I think we got slightly different views on this 5 million that Farage has taken, and I think maybe we should consider doing a show on that because there's a lot of issues around it, and I
Okay.
think they need dissecting, and everything needs putting into its place. But I think we've got slightly different views on it. I don't think donations in themselves immediately mean suspicion and corruption. I don't believe that, but we'll see. We might
Yeah,
have different view on it.
yeah. I think the people will always struggle when they hear about politicians receiving money, especially ones that are,
Yeah,
trying to be prime minister. I
and
think it.
that's reasonable. But I think again, it's like with everything, you've really got to dissect it properly and separate the issues in there.
Okay. So what sort of lessons can we learn from this whole dictatorship and, the pros, the cons, the final conclusions and stuff with
Well,
this?
I think there's lots of lessons, but I think from my political party's point of view, one of the key things we think people should take away from this is that it's really important to understand what's on in Russia is not unique to the Russians. This whole phenomenon of dictatorship and following dictators to invade other countries and war and crime and violence, this is completely universal across all countries and all periods of history. And it's very, at this point in British history, it's very easy to say, oh, Putin's terrible and the Russians, shouldn't be following him into war and supporting him. And we're not like that. But of course, history says otherwise. We spoke about this before. It was only 170 years ago that we finished fighting the last Opium War in Britain. Britain was the biggest drug cartel, government-sanctioned drug cartel on the planet ever by far. We were selling, I think, thousands of tons of opium to China to fund, our British Empire growth. And it was only in 1917 that we stopped the official opium trade to China. So, and very recently in British history, we were doing all this sort of stuff. We are the British people, and we were doing it. Just like Russia's doing all sorts of, dodgy things at the moment. We fought the Zulu. We just decimated the Zulu kingdom for diamonds and land. We exported over 3 million slaves from Africa.
Yeah.
And many other countries have done all these sort of things.
I've never asked you this before, but if you was in power and you was asked about reparations for countries, because you are very aware of, the England's rich history and the things that we've done all over the world. What are your thoughts on reparations for countries that we've obviously benefited from stealing their diamonds, lands, people?
I think you have to draw lines, because if you start reparations, where do you stop? And it just opens up endless chaos, and that chaos spreads across the planet because every country's done this. It's, if you, for example, with the slave trade, if you study the slave trade, the source of the slave trade was black Africans. If you analyze the trade and the history, you'll see straight away that the initial source was black Africans offering their enemies as slaves who were black.
Yeah.
And the middlemen, the next line, I think, of slave traders were blacks again, and then it went into the whites who picked them up at the ports.
Yeah.
So, okay, so do blacks have reparations against blacks? How would you administer that? Do you
I
see
think
what I mean?
I like to steer away. Because I think what I'm trying to base it on is from the country perspective rather
Okay.
than a
Yeah,
color perspective sort of thing, because obviously we know people like, this is no community is a stranger to this, for thousands of years, since the beginning of time. People have gone to war. There's been tribes, and people have conquered other tribes, and when they killed the men, they took the women and they sold them, like the Vikings done. The Vikings are famous for doing this,
exactly.
but more importantly, like, countries like, I think Jamaica's a good example of this. They're wanting their independence away from the UK and stuff, very, like, and demanding reparations for things that happened and stuff. It's just an interesting question that I thought I'd put to you.
It
So
is.
basically,
I think you have to draw a line. I think when crime gets to such a vast scale, and by that I mean war or, slave trade or something, or the Holocaust, it goes beyond a line where you can rebalance what has happened. It's too vast. And again, I think history supports this, because after the First World War, they had very strong economic sanctions on Germany. Europe did. And historians, I think a lot of historians believe that fueled the Second World War. And then after the Second World War, I think the political opinion was that it's best not to try and get them to repay all the costs of the war. It's too vast and it doesn't actually help. You have to draw lines, and I think this is the only sensible and pragmatic and best thing you can do.
yeah. I think, yeah, obviously, if a country says, oh, you've done this, you've done that, we want some reparations.
Yeah.
I think there's other things you can do. And I think to an extent, we probably do that already, in terms of giving aid. I'm a bit more suspicious than you, a bit more I lean more towards
Yeah,
conspiracies
I think
of
you
what,
do.
in terms of countries that, obviously, I know that the British people, the British leaders, and the British government wouldn't obviously be seen caught dead doing sanctions, restricting people and stuff like that. I think it is more, lobbies, big companies like, oil companies, all the rest of it, diamond mining companies because, ultimately these countries have so many natural resources, like, they have so many. Why aren't they allowed to just sell their resources and make money for their own country? And it goes really deep. I think I may have told you this story before, but there's a famous rapper called Akon. I think it was in Ghana. He went to the president and he says, right, I've got all this money, I've got all this investment. I want to create an energy company or something like that. And the president turned to him and said to him, look, these are the kind of things that would start wars. Like, this would start a war. So he was
In
able to
what
do.
way?
Well, he insinuated basically that should like, these countries are told what they can and can't have, and deals have been made, like, for maybe way back 50 years back, and people are, maybe it's told, look, this is our energy company, do not play around. Basically, if you decide to go with another energy company, there will be real repercussions. And, you know I think we need to, maybe we'll look into the factual sort of sides of this one day, and we'll do it.
Well,
We'll do a
bruh,
deep dive
yeah,
in and see if I can turn you around in terms of this conspiracy
okay. I
stuff.
mean, again, there's a very which we could do another show on this, but there's a very interesting case where there's one company in the world that produces the advanced machines that make chips. One company in Europe, I think it's Holland. Um, they're the only company in the world that can make these machines that make the most powerful chips that we have on the planet. And the Americans, and this is not sort of publicized a lot, but the Americans have put a lot of pressure on that company, and actually, through the powers they have banned them from selling these machines to China. So what you're talking about happens all the time, and it happens at the highest levels.
Yeah.
Because these chips, used in the military, they're used in AI, they're used in all the data centers. The most powerful chips are made by these machines. And China does not have access to that technology and is trying to develop it for itself. It's spending billions on this. So, all these dynamics are happening. And you're right to question all this. And, this is a whole nother thing, but this is where you need one world government. It's the only way you'll solve these problems.
I think so. A lot of people are against the whole one world order kind of thing, and obviously, if the people at the top, yeah, I mean, like I said, it just depends who's there. If they're reasonable, good people that have the people's best interest at heart, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with it. I think, like I've said to you before about safe cities, safe zones, and all this sort of stuff in other countries, this could be a form of that. A one world order, safe zone city that people can travel to. There's airports. The safe city is protected by some sort of group NATO agreement or something. I think that would be the way to go. I'm not sure everyone would want the whole world, a world like world order or something like that, one world government or whatever. But I think people would buy into a safe city, like, do you know what I mean by that? Like a safe city worldwide sort of order where people freedom of movement, you can all travel within the city, you can study with the city, strict laws obviously, and obviously restrictions and all the rest of it. But a reasonable civilization in all countries protected by
This
some
would
sort of
require one agreement system, though, through the UN or something else, which is
yeah.
exactly the problem we face, because it will come straight back to the problem of separate countries with separate agendas and separate leaders.
Yeah.
Unless those leaders agree to have those cities within their country, which
But
they won't agree upon,
I
you
think
come
we've
back
got
to
big.
the same problem.
I think we've got big enough guns. Big enough. I think we've got big enough guns, big enough militaries, and especially if we don't. If I think it's all about how you sell it. If you sell it, oh look, like kind of the imperial kind of side will come in and taking over. But if you sell it a different way, say, look, we're building this for you, for your people. We're going to have technology here that far surpasses what you've got. If you sell it a different way, I think it's possible, and I think people buy into it. Say, look, we're having to deal with all these people coming over from your country because they say it's not safe. They say there's genocides going on. We can create a safe spot for at least much more people than we can take into our country. And also, like I said, this doesn't have to be a charity mission. Every time I say this, people sort of think I mean, oh yeah, just fund them and just help them. These countries have crazy amounts of land, the technology. You're well aware of the farming sort of side of it, the evolution of farming and stuff like that. With some of this information, like they've got fertile land in some of these places. There could be enough. We could profit from it. And God forbid if there's any sort of diamond mines or any sort of resources, raw earth materials and stuff. This doesn't have to be a charity mission, so it could fund itself as well. And maybe the people can get a better deal of their stuff as well, so like they can start
I
trading and
think,
stuff as well.
I think, yeah, Brad, the idea is exactly right, and I'm with you all the way. All I'm saying is, for it to work, you have to have a group of countries that agree to that being done. And this is where you sort of get a chicken and egg situation, because if you look across our international politics, we have different countries with very different agendas. Look at the agenda of Trump, Putin, and, the Chinese premier. They're all on 3 different pages. And so when you've got that discrepancy in the major leaders of the world, and this applies to other countries, of course, you can't put this system together. So it's a chicken and egg situation. Unless you get one world order that can sanction this, then you can't put this plan into action. And yeah. I think we both agree, it seems like we both agree, a single world leadership would be the best thing. I certainly believe that. I feel it's the only way.
There's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that believe that there's 5 or 6 families that run the world secretly. Anyway, Marcus, there's a lot. There's a lot of that.
Go along with that. No. So anyway, should we get back to the last things I think that we should
Indeed. Let's wrap up on this.
I think the first lesson is nobody's different. We all have within us, within our psychology and our culture, the ability to fall into dictatorship and commit atrocity. And history proves that. And then what it shows is that you see everybody in the country plays their part in running that country and creating what that country is. And we've done that analysis for dictatorships. We've said, there's 24 million people in Russia who are directly working for the Kremlin and supporting the Kremlin's agenda. So, and that's true of any country. We all support the agendas that we have within that country. So we all are responsible for what's happening in a country, not just the political leadership. And this means we all have great responsibility. Because we have that power, all of us, it places responsibility on everybody in Britain to make sure we're doing the right things to stabilize the country and create what we want in there. And, you know, we don't need to get into the riots that are happening in Northern Ireland at the moment, and some in this country. You know, is that helping the country? Well, no. You know, so everybody's playing their part in destabilizing the country there with these riots.
Yeah.
So everybody has responsibility to run a country. And finally, our agenda as a party is to massive education on all of this psychology, you know, and political science about how leadership works, how everybody's involved with leadership, how people support it, how you slip into dictatorship, how you slip into violence and corruption, and how you avoid these things, and how our psychology drives this, and our desire to conform drives so much of this. So we want to educate on all of that, all adults and all children, so everybody is hyper aware of themselves and how they're creating the Britain that we live in.
Fascinating, Marcus. Fascinating. And you mentioned there about the Northern Ireland riots. That goes on to our next show, guys, on Tuesday at 1 p.m.
Yes.
We're gonna be diving deep into the psychology behind what makes people go out and commit these sort of heinous crimes, burning down houses, you know, burning cars down, burning schools, destroying their own neighborhoods, you know. Is it really, Marcus, let's put you on the spot. You're Prime Minister. How would you deal with the people rioting, racial attacks at people, you know, families being, you know, I've been great. I've had the pleasure of hearing the far right sort of version of this, where people just simply say, you know, what else could we do? You know, the government weren't listening, so now we've resorted to racial attacks, burning houses down. And then I've also heard the other voices of people saying, wait a minute, you think that's logical? And this is kind of where I am. I think I'm too logical, Marcus. But how would you as a leader deal with these people out here burning houses down, racial attacks, causing fear?
So the short response is that two wrongs don't make a right. And anybody who starts burning houses down, attacking police or anything is committing a crime, and they would be punished accordingly. And in my system, it would be much more stringent. Anybody who threatens violence or carries out violence will immediately be in prison. And as I said before, our prison system would be self-funding, so you'd have no shortage of places for these people. But the longer-term solution is always parenting and education. If these people are violently protesting because they're angry about what happened in their childhood and the trauma of their childhood and the way they were brought up in their childhood, that's why they're doing it. And that is the long-term solution, to make sure every child is parented and educated correctly so that they become fully balanced, moderate adults who have got no interest in violent protest.
Yeah, and economics is obviously plays a massive part. You're not going to see millionaires throwing things at police, burning buildings down. Unfortunately,
Generally not, no. But
I think the mass, when you look at this, the mass of this is youth. There's a lot of youth, and there's a lot of older kind of guys that have like just, I don't know, feel lost and feel like they're fighting for something.
exactly.
I don't know. But obviously what's coming out is the pure discrimination is what we're seeing, you know, and then
Yeah.
we're seeing clear acts of racial attacks as well. I've got
Yeah.
countless videos of it, you know. But Marcus, what can the people expect from this show? What will be our goal, Marcus? You know, you're very much into your psychology and stuff. I want to get people to the point where they can at least admit they have some basic biases, and that's what's almost not triggering it, because obviously we know what the trigger is their economic standards. They're angry about the government not listening to them. They think, you know, veterans are on the street, we got people on the street, and why are we just giving these houses to other people coming in and stuff? And to a point you can kind of, you have to listen to their argument. You have to listen to the people, otherwise, you know, you're going to end up with, you know, hopefully you would end. I'm all for protests. Protest peacefully, go out, protest, have your say. But when it turns into this sort of horrible violence, I mean, you're talking about setting the country back, you know, setting the country back like hundreds of years. This is very dangerous stuff here, you know. And, you know, even if one person loses their lives from these riots, you know, I think that these protesters, they will have blood on their hands for even taking part in these violent protests.
I think, look, one of the what I want to do in the next show when we drill down into this, the first thing I want to do is strip away what I call separation, where people say I'm a good person and they're bad. This idea is just not true. We all have the potential to behave badly, and we all do behave badly to some degree. I do, you do, everybody does. You know, we all fail to be empathetic to others to some degree. So that's the first thing I want to explain as we start drilling down. And then you need to go deeper and unpick all the psychology that leads people to enter into violence in any form. Right down to why people, you know, will insult others, you know, with bad language and such like. And of course, you know, we see this in the comments that we get sometimes. That is a sort of mild form of violence, of attack. And so, you know, I want to take people on that deeper journey where we really start understanding that this psychology plays out in all of us, and how to unpick it and how to master it so we're fully aware and in control of our behavior.
Sounds like a hell of a show, guys. And guys, don't miss it. We're going to be digging deep into this. Why you're doing these things, who's triggering you into doing these things, and trying to get you to be honest with yourself, guys, as well, about the real reason, the real root to what's causing this angering you. And acting on emotion is never a good thing. But guys, this was the Everyone is God Political Podcast. I am Brudsy. This is Marcus White. Marcus, tell him who you are, Marcus, and what you're running for.
Marcus White, leader of Everyone is God, Britain's visionary political party, and I'm standing to be Prime Minister at the next general election.
Should be a hell of a run, Marcus. We look forward to the process.
Okay.
Guys, we'll see you soon.
Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you everyone for watching. I'm Marcus White, leader of Everyone is God, Britain's most visionary political party. Subscribe to us on YouTube or visit our website if you would like to find out more and get involved.